Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Today, we're exploring the system of modern medicine through Elinor Cleghorn's Unwell Women, and we're going to try to understand exactly why the disbelief of women's pain became, for so long, just medical common sense. Now, this isn't a story about a few bad doctors or individual mistakes. What we're really digging into here is a systemic pattern, a deep-seated bias that has shaped healthcare for centuries and, as we'll see, still impacts women's health today. What Cleghorn's book does so powerfully is trace this pattern of mistrust all the way from ancient Greece right up to the modern clinic. And it reveals this really startling, consistent history where women's own reports about their bodies, their own suffering, have just been systematically doubted and dismissed. This quote from over 100 years ago just hits you, right? It perfectly captures the heart of the problem. It's a crisis of belief. I mean, when the expert in the room, the doctor, tells you and everyone else that there's nothing wrong, what can you do? So, here's the book's core insight, and it's a big one. Medicine didn't just fail women by accident. Its very foundations were built on this powerful and deeply flawed assumption that the female body itself is just inherently unreliable. And this all boils down to a key concept called androcentrism. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's a medical viewpoint that was built from the ground up, assuming the male body is the default, the human standard. Everything else, especially a woman's body, was seen as a deviation from that norm. And we're not talking about a few decades ago. No, this idea goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They didn't just see the female body as different. They medically defined it as inherently faulty, a kind of lesser version of the male standard, ruled by these mysterious and totally unpredictable reproductive organs. This wasn't just some cultural belief. It was baked into Western medicine as a fundamental truth for thousands of years. So you might be asking, how did this foundational bias actually play out in the real world? Well, it created these patterns that have just echoed through the centuries, turning ancient myths into very modern and often very harmful medical realities. Let's start in ancient Greece. Physicians there literally believed that a woman's uterus could just detach and wander around her body, causing everything from shortness of breath to emotional distress. And you have to understand, this wasn't some metaphor. This was the diagnosis. And that myth, the wandering womb, it didn't just fade away. It got a makeover. The Greek name for the uterus, hystera, gave its name to a brand new diagnosis, hysteria. For centuries, this became a medical catch-all, right? It was this convenient bucket to throw any and all of women's physical symptoms into, dismissing them as purely emotional or psychological. And make no mistake, this is not just some quirky ancient history lesson. This pattern of dismissing women's pain by saying it's all in your head has evolved, for sure, but it has never disappeared. The language just gets a modern update. The wandering womb becomes hysteria, which later becomes a psychosomatic disorder, and today it might be called medically unexplained symptoms. The labels change, but that underlying logic of disbelief, it remains stubbornly intact. And all of this has direct, really damaging consequences in clinics today. It means women's pain is far more likely to be seen as emotional instead of biological. It's why they're more likely to be prescribed sedatives when what they really need is pain medication. The impact is just staggering. For a disease like endometriosis, which affects 1 in 10 women, the average delay to get a diagnosis is anywhere from 6 to 10 years. A decade of suffering. And this disbelief is dangerously magnified for Black women who've had to fight against centuries of racist, baseless myths that they have a higher tolerance for pain, a prejudice that is deeply, deeply embedded in medicine's history. Okay, to make this really concrete, let's just imagine a patient's chart. A woman comes in and she reports clear, debilitating physical symptoms. We're talking excruciating pelvic pain, chronic fatigue, heavy bleeding. But then, the system's biased lens kicks in. The doctor's authority, their interpretation, overwrites the patient's own words. Her lived reality, what's happening in her own body, isn't just ignored, it's effectively erased. And in its place, her physical reality gets rewritten as a psychological failing. Her legitimate suffering is dismissed, and the path to a real diagnosis is completely blocked. This, right here, is that system of disbelief in action. Now, it's really important to say that understanding this history isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame to individual doctors. It's about recognizing the cultural system that medicine has inherited. a system that, for a very long time, has prioritized its own so-called objective data over a patient's own testimony. For centuries, women just haven't been seen as reliable narrators of their own bodies. Their knowledge, their expertise on their own experience has been devalued. So rebuilding trust means a really fundamental shift has to happen. Medicine has to start treating a patient's testimony as what it is, crucial evidence. And that brings us to the solution Cleghorn points to, paraphrasing the great Maya Angelou. It's so simple, but it's also so profound. It's not about some complicated new technology. It's about the simple act of listening and of believing. Ultimately, this whole reframing helps us see that the future of medicine really depends on the answer to this one question. It challenges all of us to imagine a system where the default response isn't suspicion, but belief. For the full, long-form deep dive into this book and its ideas, follow the link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.